This is part 3 of the How to Practice series, which are short sermons on getting your together, musically speaking. Firstly, if you haven't checked out part 1, which looks at posture for bass players, or part 2, which looks at how to find a music teacher who isn't a total jackass, then those videos are linked in the description below, so check them out. This video is going to examine the benefit of tracking your practice, and I'm going to steal a quote that's often attributed to business expert Peter Drucker, and that is the phrase, "What gets measured gets managed." So the act of tracking your practice might seem like an insanely nerdy and mundane thing to do, but actually it's a very powerful tool in taking a look at what you're doing in the practice room and realizing what works really well and what doesn't work and can be scrapped or changed. The first thing that I recommend to anyone, regardless of how long they've been playing, is to keep a regular written practice diary, which covers the sort of minutiae of what you do on a daily basis or however often it is that you practice. This might include things like the exercises or concepts that you're working on, the speeds at which you're playing them, the keys which you practice them in, and the amount of time that you're spending on each thing. Now, this diary can either be in the traditional written form, or you can keep a notes file on your phone or your laptop or whatever. Some people like to use Evernote software or OneNote. I prefer the more old school traditional paper-based diary approach. I used to use an A5 day per page diary planner, but then I got really embarrassed about the amount of blank pages in those diaries, so I switched to just a plain blank notebook. Part of the reason that I'm doing this video is to give myself a kick in the ass, because I feel that I don't practice often enough, and that upsets me because I get on gigs and I try to play things that I used to be able to play, and I find that they're not under my fingers anymore, and that's annoying. I do between 70 and 100 gigs a year. I teach all the time, and even though I engage with music on some level every single day, it's very rare that I get a consistent block of practice, and I don't do enough real practice, and that's something that I'd like to change. In fact, the only answer that anyone can really give to the question of how much do you practice is not enough. Music is completely infinite, there's no end point, so there's always something new to learn or something that you can improve on, regardless of who you are or how long you've been playing the instrument. And that's both the best and the worst thing about playing music. So this is how my practice diary looks up close and in depth. It's just a plain A5 notebook, but in there I've kept track of all the days when I've been practicing or not practicing, as the case may be, and I can embarrass myself by looking through and seeing what was in there. I've kept track of things that I was transcribing, so here I was doing quite a lot of hours transcribing a Paul Desmond saxophone solo on All the Things You Are, which I've probably forgotten how to play. I need to revise. So this is good. It's like going back in time and remembering the things that I was working on, and then picking out things that I should probably be able to do now but might have forgotten. So for every day, you've got the amount of time spent, what I was doing, and then the tempos and keys and things that I was working in. It's also great for me to look at it and see what my bias is towards certain keys or certain exercises. And by checking up on myself regularly, I can make sure that I don't just sit in my comfort zone and practice the same things that I've been practicing all the time for months in the same keys that I've always been doing them. So it kind of can motivate me to stretch myself and get out of my comfort zone, which is a great thing. There's an oft cited quote, I don't know the attribution, but the quote is, "Even the palest ink is better than the strongest memory," and that's definitely true in this case. I don't like to rely on my brain for anything, really, because it's unreliable. Being a fairly neurotic and nerdy type of person, I like to take this concept of tracking and expand it into other areas of my daily life. One of the best books that I've read in the past year is Deep Work by Cal Newport, which is a great productivity and time management book. I'd probably actually phrase it as a life management book, because it's had a huge impact on how I run things on a day-to-day basis, and I'd really recommend it for anyone who wants to get more out of their time, or maybe feels that they are perpetually busy but not really achieving anything on a grand scale. So one of the things that Cal Newport advocates in the book Deep Work is to keep a running log of the time you spend doing important activities, those so-called deep work activities. Now for me, deep work constitutes things like practice, obviously, meditation. If you want to know why meditation is important, then take a look at the video I made called Your Brain is Rotten. So practice, meditation, exercise, transcriptions and articles for the website, also gigs and reading. Those are all things that I constitute as deep work and feel are very important. So my deep work time in all of those activities gets logged in a very silly little app called Forest, which I actually find very effective. Essentially, it just locks you out of your phone for given amounts of time while you can work on things without distraction. So everything gets logged in Forest, and then at the end of the week, I can tally up how much of each activity I've achieved. And that is really useful in seeing what's been good during the week, and also, more importantly, what has been not so good and what I need to prioritize for the week ahead or the month ahead. Now, in the past couple of weeks, I've had a couple of short notice dep gigs which have necessitated cramming a lot of music into my memory at short notice, and that has meant that a lot of things related to practice have been swept aside. It's also meant that I haven't really done very much exercise or much meditation recently, and that kind of upsets me. So I need to prioritize those things in the coming weeks. So actually, when it comes down to it, the main tools that I use for tracking practice are nothing more than a paper diary and an app that involves planting cartoon trees on my phone. I was experimenting earlier in the year with using a desk planner, a paper desk planner, to map out everything that was going to happen in the week ahead, but I found that I was never in the same room as it, so it swiftly moved into obsolescence. I actually found that using iCal to keep track of things was much better because I tend to always be in the same room as my laptop and or my phone. A big part of practicing effectively is actually allocating time for practice in advance of the actual situation. So assuming that you are like most people and have a number of non-musical obligations that you have to fulfill on a regular basis, such as going to work, eating, sleeping, doing laundry, hanging out with family and friends, your significant other, or your cats, then it's quite easy for practicing to fall down the priority list and get swept aside entirely. So what I like to do is, typically on a Sunday, I will spend 10 to 15 minutes in iCal mapping out in as much detail as possible where I'm going to be during the week ahead and when I might be able to fit in chunks of practice, and crucially what I'm going to practice. So I try and map out everything in as much detail as possible up to a week in advance. Now that means that I'm much more likely to stick to that schedule if it's already in place, and it removes the element of what I'd call decision paralysis in the practice room, which is that tendency when you suddenly find that you have half an hour or an hour to spare and you can get some practice in, to waste 10 or 15 minutes deciding what it is you're going to work on that day. So this all might seem like an unbearably OCD method of organizing your life, but I find that I'm definitely fitter, happier and more productive when I take a little bit of time each week to plan things out and keep track of my life, compared to just leaving things to chance. Coming back to what I said in the last video about finding a teacher, and this idea that everyone is self-taught and nobody is self-taught, but everyone is actually in charge of their musical development, and you have to take responsibility for everything that you do in the practice room, regardless of whether you're being taught by a teacher or whether you are pursuing your musical goals just off your own back. You have to take charge of your musical development because no one else will.